The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to Faith Matters for this edition here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis today, and we are flying as a duo today.
It's a very empty studio without Robert, isn't it?
He does tend to fill it.
Hey, Robert.
Spiritually fill it. All right. Well, we want to talk today about a couple of things. Last week we talked about the prayers that opened up the Republican convention, and so we thought it would only be equal time and be some fairness here to talk about the prayers that opened up the Democrat convention. And there were some interesting things that certainly happened during those moments. In the Democrats' opening prayer, there was a moment where we had some heckling going on actually during the prayer. And it was Monday night in Philadelphia. This is from the Fox News report, actually from Todd Starnes' commentary, which you can find this everywhere. It says, Monday night in Philadelphia, the Democrats opened their proceedings with a word of prayer from a Christian minister. But when the preacher offered a blessing upon Hillary Clinton, all you know what broke loose, according to Todd Starnes. And we have an opportunity, oh God, this is a quote from the Reverend Cynthia Hale, to give undeniable evidence to our commitment to justice and equality by nominating Hillary Rodham Clinton as our candidate for the highest office in the land. And then the as he says, the poor lady was heckled by the Bernie Sanders supporters. In listening to this, Doc, we know that this is show in many ways, prayer in this convention, but couldn't the Bernie supporters at least sit on their hands for a moment?
No, see, they saw what happened at the Republican National Convention, and that is all the people were down on the floor yelling back and forth, you remember, and they sent Pastor Stearns, I think it was his name, from South Carolina up there, and he started, just got loud and started praying loud.
He wasn't even scheduled, I don't think, for that, was he?
I don't know if he was scheduled at that moment or not.
He was scheduled for the benediction, not the invocation.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So it was a preemptive move on the part of the RNC to get everybody to quiet down. And so I think that everybody was ready. It's like if they try to do this to the Democratic convention, we're just going to heckle right after. But then what a choice does poor Reverend Hale make?
Right.
But to make a statement that is not in any way, shape, or form what you and I would consider a prayer that we would offer in our own church or for somebody in a hospital or for our own child.
Right.
I mean, we have an opportunity, oh God, to give undeniable evidence to our commitment to justice and equality by nominating Hillary Rodham Clinton. I would heckle her just on the fact that it's such a pathetic prayer. I mean, I don't think any Christian person listening to that recognizes immediately the show or the editorialization of prayer, which is when we've decided that we are no longer responsible to talk to God, actually, but we need to tell the people sitting in front of us what we need to tell God.
But unlike many of us who have had to read Scripture through a crying baby, or something else going on, is that instead of continuing on, she stops.
Yes,
and that just gives encouragement to the Bernie crowd to keep on going. Bernie. It goes from a boo to a chant.
Well, at least they were chanting for a Jew, so that's good. I mean, in the midst of a prayer in Jesus' name, yes, we did get a Jew in there, and that's good. I just think this is so pathetic. We have all grown up in the news business and the political business as you have been, and we've all watched chaplains of senates and speakers at major conventions get into this editorial prayer mode, where you simply take a stump speech,
right,
or a political speech, and you throw a few "oh gods" and in Jesus' name in, and somehow that passes as a prayer.
Right.
That's not.
Well,
right.
it's like taking a pop song and mentioning Jesus in it, and it's all of a sudden it's a religious song.
Do people
Christian
do that?
Song? Oh, no, that doesn't make it that.
Okay.
Doesn't make it so. But you notice, and I would love to see if there's an original text, but you notice what she did after that. Did you hear that in her prayer? No. What she end up as in order to try to get them back, she invokes God's name again, and then calls for unity. And I think that was ad-libbed at the end. Her very last line was something about calling for unity. Amen.
Well, at that time, I was pumping my fist and screaming "Bernie, Bernie" at the TV, so I really missed that part.
Your Bernie sign you were holding it up in front of the TV.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. But there was it was interesting. I was watching the some of the live streaming that was going on away from the networks, but what some people were holding up, on their phones and live streaming, and the crowd was really quite loud for that. And then afterwards, a lot of the Bernie supporters, of course, left, and then they stormed into the media tent. Now that was fun to watch too, because they stormed into the media tent. A lot of them, some with tape over their mouths. Have you seen that one? The tape over their mouths there, saying they didn't have a voice in the after Mrs. Clinton was nominated. They storm into the media tent, and it was like the dog who caught the car. They didn't know what to do with it. They were really interrupting and taking over from people trying to do live broadcasts.
Yeah. Well, at this point, politics would be a much better place if there was more tape over more mouths. I think across the board, Ben.
All right. Now, we contrasted the prayer that opened the Republican convention with Willie Robertson coming in and offering another prayer there, which would also was what you would expect and what you have heard actually on Duck Dynasty probably over and over again, where he invokes Jesus' name and calls for guidance and for
where he
discernment.
actually directs the prayer to God is
Yes.
what we're trying to say.
Right.
Yes.
Now there was a second prayer though in the Democrat convention too, and tell us a little bit about that one. That was from a man named Sherman Jackson, and in the AP story on it, he was called Imam Sherman Jackson.
Yeah, Sherman is a great thinker, a theologian, if you will, particularly about Sharia. He is he's at the University of Southern California. I think he got a degree at Pennsylvania, got his doctorate at Pennsylvania. He's a very bright guy. He's very well known and well respected around Muslim circles. He was asked to provide a prayer, which he did, and he did direct his prayer. And of course, this is the challenge for me as a Christian. If you're praying to a God that doesn't exist, then does he hear your prayer? I mean, we've invited a man to come up and pray to Allah, and so is that a prayer? I mean, I guess to him it is. I just have a problem with it as a Christian person, is all I'm saying. But taking that apart, looking at the prayer, he does direct the majority of his prayer to God, which I appreciate.
Because I didn't see you. You found a script.
I did. I'm
prayer.
holding it right here in my hot little hands. And again, these are editorial prayers. When you say something like, this is in the prayer, as a Muslim sage once put it, God will aid a just nation even if it is unbelieving, and God will not aid an unjust nation even if it is believing. Well, the theological points that we could make on that notwithstanding, that's not a prayer. When you start saying,
hey, here's what you do.
Yeah, as Harry Truman once said, Lord, like God doesn't know this. So it's very clear I'm not talking to God. I'm now talking to the people in front of me once again.
And that brings up really what is the role here of prayer in politics. I think probably since Ronald Reagan, and maybe it's before then, but almost every political speech now ends with God bless the United States of America.
Yes.
And so are they actually invoking his name to seek that blessing, or is it now just the closing sentence?
It's what we call the business boilerplate, right? It's the end. It's the thing that we say at the end of everything. It would be if somebody today didn't say that, then the people would be aghast. Did you notice Obama didn't say God bless America and God bless you? So you kind of have to say it. Here's the thing about prayer. The point of any nation, the point of any person, the point of any marriage, the point of any church is to bring glory to God. It is to glorify God.
Right.
And the one thing that is always missing in these prayers is asking God to help us, to give us strength and wisdom, reason to bring glory to his name. We always stop short of that. We always say, help us to pick the right candidate, give us wisdom and guidance. As the Muslim scholar wrote, shine your light of vision on us. Well, that's all pleasant and good, but the reality is the place of prayer in politics is, Lord, give us politicians and give us a conscience that will bring glory to your name, that the whole world might know that you've created us, that we are your people, and that you're a good and loving God. That's the point of prayer, but that's not what comes out of people's mouths on podiums.
And we have seen now this become the necessity to have these prayers at political conventions when they are basically only covered in the media or even watched in the media when there's something about them that somebody doesn't like. Otherwise They just sort of pass on by. Like Willie Robertson's, for example, didn't receive any attention.
I liked it.
Yeah, it was good. Oh, it was very good. And welcome again to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball along with Bishop Doc Loomis, and we'll have more to come in just a moment. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis, as we talk about some of the different events of the week. And one of the most tragic things that happened during this past week, we were talking about the attack in France during a church mass, where a Catholic priest, 84 years old, I believe 85 or 84 years old, had his throat slashed by the attackers who were screaming Islamic phrases during that time, Islamic militants. And I believe a nun may still be in critical condition. I haven't heard an update there. But the story that we want to look at here is also how that relates to the Catholic Church and how the Pope has commented on this. It's from the Indian Express. France attack puts blemish on Pope's maiden trip to Poland. Pope Francis will start his first trip to Poland on Wednesday to preside at an International Catholic Youth Jamboree. So this has started the day before we were recording this. A usually joyous event that has been dampened by the murder of a Catholic priest in France. News that suspected Islamic militants interrupted a church service. Suspected can be, it's a very loose, weak term here for this because we know it. Church service in Saint Antoine de Rouen. Is that how you say that? Is that close?
I think so.
And near Rouen, forced 85-year-old parish priest Father Jacques Hamal to his knees and slit his throat and sent a sudden deep chill over the World Youth Day event. You probably have followed some of these events that are coming up.
I'm just laughing because in radio world, having to pronounce French names is like when we give people readings in church that have all those
kings and
names.
all the other things. Yes, if you just do it confidently, then people believe you. But it's here we have the Pope on the eve of making another historic visit to Poland and doing what is going to be a youth convocation that's going on now. How the Pope expresses his horror at this event. Is that enough? Should there be, Doc? I mean, when you look at this, does the Catholic Church now, having been attacked by Islamists in their sanctuary, should there be a more forceful or more maybe cogent even response?
Well, if you're talking about a verbal or written response, then yes, I mean, there should be a condemnation of the violence. There should be a call for peace. There should be a prayer lifted for the immortal soul of the
Indeed.
man who's done it, yeah, there should be a response. The question that we're often asked as Christians is, should there be a response? Do you notice in the article they actually interviewed a guy from Bordeaux, one of the young millennials that was heading off to this World Youth Day. And he said, Pope John Paul II said that we should be tolerant and not resort to force. My heart tells me that that is true, but after what happened, my head is now telling me something else. And that's the question we get most often, I think, is how do we respond physically? How do we respond? Do we attack Muslims now? What do we do? Mm-hmm. And
Because we must do something.
we must do something, right?
And as the phrases we've heard often said, prayer is not enough.
Yeah, well, here's the
Isn't-
thing. Jesus calls us to a very strange manner of living in which if our enemy does something to hurt us, we are to love him. And that if somebody were to slap us on the cheek, we were to offer him the other cheek. And that seems so, it seems counterintuitive, obviously, but it's so different than the world we're in right now, where when somebody does something, we punish them back. And the church is the place that's supposed to hold up the obedience to God's command. That is, we're actually not going to do something back. A guy actually asked me this in a class the other day. He said, I can't stand you Christians because something has to be done and you won't do anything. And I think what we need as pastors and as Christians to tell our folks is, actually, when you're being obedient to God, you are doing something. Mm-hmm. It looks like my hands aren't moving. It looks like I didn't draw my gun, but I am doing something. And the thing I'm doing is actually harder than the thing you want me to do because I'm being obedient to God. And what I know, and I think what the church needs to remember, is that if we're obedient to God, if we do the thing he tells us to do, if we do love our enemies, and pray for those who persecute us, if we do from time to time turn that other cheek, then we're being obedient to him and he takes care of it. Vengeance is his. It doesn't belong to us. He said that. Right. I didn't say that to make that up. So the thing is, you are doing something when you're being obedient to do nothing.
In some communities, certainly religious communities, have formed around that idea. The German pietists, the Amish, they certainly understand that and have been subject to that kind of oppression and that kind of violence in their lives. But I think there's how our president, President Obama, has been criticized for not naming Islamic terrorism or radical Islamic terrorism as a source of these activities. Is Pope Francis under the same scrutiny for not pointing out that there's an ideological evil?
I don't think. Here's the thing. There's a priest standing at the altar of his church. He's 80-some years old. Is that right? Remember that right?
85.
85 years old. He's forced to his knees. His throat's slit by a man is clearly in terrorist mode, worshiping a different, albeit non-existent God and slicing him. I don't think there's anything the Pope can say that is going to convince anybody any more than the plain, in-your-face brutality of what the man's done. I think we get it. Mm-hmm. So does he need to say something?
Is that different from the critique of the president not calling it what it is? It is different, I think.
It's different because one is held to us under a secular microscope and the other under an eternal and theological microscope. And we as Christians, as I said, look, America is a real simple place. You hit us and we will hit you back. Mm-hmm. I mean, Pearl Harbor, remember the Maine, take your pick. You hit us, we hit you back. That's not Christ's teaching, and that's not where the Pope is. That's not what he's trying to teach, I don't think.
He is under the teaching of there's neither Greek nor Jew, nor slave nor free, a male or female, right? So
in Christ, yes. So I mean, I think the Pope's position is, as it always has been, and as this gentleman noted right here, be tolerant, don't resort to force, but love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you.
In Poland, where they're hosting this conference, of course, obviously security has been heightened. lots of things that have gone on. But we have seen over and over again that the terrorism is not necessarily striking at these major events, at least not yet, but are striking again at the where the moments are not expected in a church offering mass. Some people have drawn parallels to Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was offering mass when he was attacked. Is this just further? Actually, I think, as many have said, our doors should be open. We should be vulnerable in worship.
Absolutely, yeah. This is. There's two Catholics that you brought up here, both this priest and then Romero. But if we just take a step back a little bit and go into Lutheranism or Anglicanism, then what we see is these attacks at the altar, the attacks at the homes of the priests and the bishops, is really a huge thing right now. I think most Americans are not aware of the numbers of attacks on clergy all over the world.
All over the world,
yes. We're beginning to hear about attacks on Christians. But the idea that the Muslim has is always, it's like that biblical thing we read, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. And the Muslims have a very direct intention of striking as many shepherds as they can and scattering the sheep. And this is particularly true in countries like the Sudan, like Nigeria, like Congo, where we're constantly seeing Anglican and Lutheran and I can't speak for Methodists, but bishops and priests are being killed, their wives raped, their children taken away for ransom or worse on a regular basis.
Yet it's from these Christian communities that come the most orthodox of teachings and positions in the world.
Yes, because what we know is that this kind of suffering is what breeds that steadfastness and that strength and even hope, I think the Bible says in the end. So yes, where terrorism reigns and where the blood of the martyrs is spilled, the church grows and the church does solidify. There's no question about that, Ben.
Yeah, but in the northern regions, we seem to be more of let's just assimilate to their point of view, and whether it's in offering a Islamic prayer in a national convention, or if it's making sure that we're having ecumenical, all multi-faith services whenever tragedy strikes. And are these elements where we're just missing the point?
Yeah, I mean, don't doubt the Lord. This stuff does not bless him. This wonderful whirlwind of inclusion and everybody's okay and everybody ought to be, listened to and right. I just don't think the Lord is wild about the idea that false gods and false teachings are now becoming a dominant part of our American culture. I just don't think it blesses him. And I think in time, his time, not my time, not anybody else's time, but in his time, he eventually shakes all that stuff down and he reinstitutes his purpose and his will. And he's going to do it. And I think soon.
I have to feel like these forces of evil that do attack in the southern hemisphere against these priests are there because that's where they're going to meet the most resistance, and that's the biggest fight. Maybe forces of evil feel like they've already won.
Well, they are there because that is the frontier of the expansion of Islam.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station FM 107 at AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 at AM 1240, and I'm Ben Ball along with Bishop Doc Loomis. And our next thing that we want to discuss today is an article or an action that came out of, this is an article in the Los Angeles Times. Court says Obamacare birth control option may violate Catholics' rights, even if they don't use it. Michael Hiltzik writes this article. He says the Affordable Care Act continues to provide an opportunity for religious zealots to complain that somehow, somewhere, might be doing something of which they disapprove. You think there's a little opinion here, perhaps?
I didn't notice anything at all.
Okay. Another such a case advancing through the courts is that of Missouri State Representative Paul Whelan and his wife Teresa, who assert that Obamacare's contraceptive mandate tramples on their family's religious rights, even if they don't make use of it. St. Louis federal judge Jean Constance Hamilton, who is a H.W. Bush appointee, thinks that they may have a point. On Thursday, she denied the government's motion to throw out the case on summary judgment. Merely requiring individuals to buy an insurance policy that provides contraception could infringe on their religious conscience, she ruled, in clearing the case for trial. This is yet another expansion of the murky standard the Supreme Court set in 2014 Hobby Lobby ruling, which established the principle that corporations can feel that their religious scruples are infringed even if they're not religious entities. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, writing in dissent, called the decision one of startling breadth. She warned that the court had ventured into a minefield by opening the door for religious exemptions from general public laws to be claimed by almost any entity on any grounds. The premise of the law, and the Supreme Court was also considering, was whether or not there was a substantial burden in for the government to to override someone's religious rights. Did they have a substantial case to ride it, or could they have provided a less burdensome way for this mandate to be applied? So Doc, here we have a case that seems to be going in the positive direction of those who oppose Obamacare's mandates, yet there's still going to be plenty of arguments still to come.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm a few hours short of that legal degree, but this is confusing to me, this case. So we'll just sit here like the guys we are and talk it through. But the argument used to be, I don't want to put money into a health care program that I'm forced by law to be in, that then provides contraception, particularly the morning after pill was the big thing, for other people. I don't want to pay for somebody else to have an abortion.
Right.
Okay. I don't want to pay for somebody else's contraception. That's actually not the argument here.
No, that's not the argument.
Which is interesting. So this represents a kind of a nuance in the approach that's being taken. And this argument, if I can state it correctly, is they think that this particular family, the Weiland family, would understand that they don't want a policy that provides access to contraception,
yes,
because they have 3 daughters, and they didn't really think it was appropriate for their daughters to have an insurance card that would allow them to go down to the local drugstore and get contraception. Am I catching that right?
Yeah, as minors, or as under their policy. Yeah,
under their policy, right. And so this is something that's a little bit new, and the question is going to be, and I hear what you're saying about is there an unfair burden, or
well, the idea is that if you're going to restrict someone's rights, you have to do it in the least burdensome way. So that, for example, since the court ruled that the Obamacare is a tax, it falls under the same kind of logic that a lot of people say they don't want to pay taxes because it goes to war.
Exactly. That's precisely the case.
So so they're offering a way to be the least, but they can't necessarily come to any particular constitutional right for that. Religious expression, though, is a constitutional right, and so the court says you have to be, if you're going to require a mandate, you have to be as harmless as possible to that right.
Yeah. And what this basically does, the way that things are set up right now, at least in the Weiland family's policy, is the government has inserted a temptation into their family that they're unwilling to accept.
Right.
They say, we've raised our children different than this. And it's funny, the LA Times people, you started off with the first paragraph and right away we knew where we were going. But the LA Times folks, they attack the family every time. Well, I guess this family must be feeling insecure about the way they raised their daughters. If they raised them with any kind of, scruples at all, they wouldn't worry about whether they were going to the drugstore and buying contraception. Well, that's not the point.
No.
I mean, it is the point. They attack the family. That's horrid. But that's not the point. The point is the government really shouldn't have the right. I mean, I don't want the government walking around my house and putting pork products in my front yard because I know me. Mm-hmm. I will go out and eat them. That's too much of a temptation. And I think this is just another piece of it. Why are you doing this? Why government are you making this stuff available to a family that simply says, I don't need that temptation in my garden?
Well, what's interesting here too is that this representative is not arguing the mandate. He's not arguing that he must have health insurance.
Yeah, that's why it's a different kind of day here.
And the squishy part again, the difficult part in doing this is that he might make the mandate about his minor children, except that you're allowed to have your children up to age 26 under your health insurance plan, including Obamacare. So that becomes a very different kind of animal. What do you mean, the 25-year-old daughter can't go receive contraception if she chooses? But the fact is that she could, because she could then qualify for her own policy. She doesn't have to be under her parents' policy.
Now here's
so there's lots of pieces of this puzzle, and none of them are fitting.
Yeah, and here's the reason I think that this was such an easy. Well, I'm sure this Judge Hamilton had some consternation about this, but this is a pretty easy request for summary judgment to deny, because basically what the government did was they came in and said a couple of things. They said, one, apparently this is all about a family who doesn't trust its kids, and then the other thing they said was, and I have to read this because it's so precious and so government attorney, rather their insistence on a personalized policy, the Weilands, could conceivably drive up the costs for everyone in the pool, since it would take administrative effort by the insurers, which presumably they would pass on to all consumers. And Ben, you and I were talking about this during the break. I mean, the reality is this family simply doesn't want contraception on the policy.
Right. Which
so
means highlight and delete.
Highlight, delete, it's out of the policy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what kind of a fee there is to pass along to the rest of the pool.
Well, the government is acting like they still have to load the paper up into the Remington and type a whole new policy, and it's just not the case
distribute
anymore.
it and take a vote. And
Yeah,
I mean, it's just here. The reality of all this stuff is so simple. The government can ask us to do things. They can even make us do things. But as you said, with the least amount of pressure against our religious beliefs, and this is so simple. Mm-hmm. This is so ridiculous. All you do is tell them you have the same policy that the guy next door to you does, but your policy doesn't include contraception. Thank you very much for playing Obamacare. And you're done.
The Weilands, this article, again, taking the side of the government's case is pretty obvious they are, but they demand access to a policy that doesn't offer contraception under any circumstances, like they used to have via Paul's service in the Missouri state legislature before Obamacare rendered such policies unlawful. Obamacare forces the Weilands into a cruel choice, they contend. Paul can give up his seat in the legislature and find another job, or look for a health plan without contraceptive coverage, even though there aren't any, or give up coverage for his daughters and face fines. So he says, by the by, that he doesn't consider contraception to be medicine, health care, or a means of providing for the well-being of persons. Well, that's a kind of a legalese response there. But the idea that they demand access to a policy that such, even though such policies are unlawful, well, that's the crux of this, is that it's ridiculous for a policy to be unlawful. That it certainly ought to be lawful to have your freedom of religious expression. I mean, that seems to be basically lawful. So what if there are multiple policies? I mean, that's the kind of the Weiland's contention is, yeah. And the problem?
I don't know. I wish Robert was here so he could tell us what's happened to America. He has thoughts on this, of course, and it amazes me that we begin a country together our fathers begin a country together, and they determined that the things that we hold dear and the things that we believe, our common faith, is going to be protected from the infringement of government. Nothing could be more clear. Nothing in the Constitution could be any more clear than that I am protected against a government that wants to impose its beliefs or its morals on me when I have a different set of them. That's how it is. Now, this is very clearly a case of a government saying, we are going to impose on you something that you don't believe in. This is fifth grade community education. I mean, this is just something you learned in school at an early age.
This falls under that list of everything I know I learned in kindergarten.
It's absolutely. I mean, if you don't know by fifth grade that you're protected from your government imposing their morals on you, then you really don't know America. And apparently, there's an awful lot of people that have gone to law school and are sitting on benches across the country and holding public office that never got past the fifth grade and never got this. There is just no whether they can find a legal way to do it or not. There is a moral imperative in this country that we don't do that. It's just who we are. It's what defines us. And when we begin looking for ways to get around it for the sake of funding a program that somebody thinks is special, I hurt for this country and where we are, and pray to God that minds and hearts get changed.
We're going to have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Hey, welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis. And our next article that we want to talk about is what originated as an Associated Press article, but a critique of it is coming up in a website called getreligion.org. And the headline is, "A year after Boy Scouts' decision to allow gay adult leaders, some awkward language from AP." It's written by Bobby Ross Jr. And in this article, Doc, he does quote a lot of the AP story, and most of the AP story, in fact. But is the awkward passive language intentional or just bad writing? That's my question about a single line that stands out to me in the Associated Press story on the Boy Scouts of America. More on the specific sentence in question in a moment. The question the line that he quotes is the first line of the article. "Despite dire warnings, the Boy Scouts are faring well 1 year after easing the ban on gay adults." More on the specific sentence in the question in a moment. But first, a little background. A year ago, the Boy Scouts made headlines when the national organization ended its ban on openly gay adult leaders. A few of our posts at the time included Boy Scouts church-based troops and the threat of lawsuits about gay leaders, and some other posts that they mention here. Kudos to the AP for revisiting the decision in the 1 year mark. However, this is one of those stories that feels squishy, as in broad sweeping statements supported by quicksand from the beginning. Throughout the piece, there are more anecdotes than hard data. Feel free to read the whole thing and tell me if I'm wrong, is what this post says. Again, at getreligion.org. Now, you've read both this critique, Doc, and the original article, and I have some opinions about Associated Press. I know I've shared on my morning show before, and I've shared with Associated Press, in fact, about sometimes how they do these things. They make statements, sweeping statements, without context or attribution. And this idea about there were dire warnings for the Boy Scouts of America is one of those. There's a pretty good example of that. Doc, what did you feel about how this was treated?
Well, this is this organization, getreligion.org, they exist to analyze how the press handles religious matters. That's kind of what they do. Mm-hmm. This is so how is the press dealing with religious articles and they're publishing? And so this is, it seems to me, this is not an unusual article for them to write. And they've taken this AP article to task. The word he used was squishy, and nothing could be any more true. The reality is that it came time to revisit something, and they just threw a bunch of editorial together, a bunch of opinion together. There's nothing in the article that the AP wrote that has any documentation, verification. There's no Nobody is quoted. No names are listed. It's just a guy saying, well, a lot of people said it was going to be really bad, or a lot of bad things that happened, but it really didn't. It all really worked out all right. Everything's good. Have a nice day. That's the article.
Yeah.
That's what the AP wrote. Well, let me just tell you, first of all, that's not the truth. The Boy Scouts of America have been in a steady decline. I'm an Eagle Scout. I've been working with a scout troop here. I've been in scouting my entire life. Scouting is not on the rise. It is in a
not
state
robust.
It is not robust at any stretch. In fact, you have to laugh when you read the article, and it says that it's beginning to stabilize after decades of decline, and that is not what I call robust. I don't actually think that even those numbers are accurate. The reality is that there are some new groups that have come out of the Boy Scout movement who have taken a slightly more orthodox, perhaps, approach to life and scouting. Yes, it went back to the issues of human sexuality, and those groups have continued to grow, and new troops have been formed all over the country. Gosh, I really find it hard to imagine. And I haven't looked at numbers from this year. I find it hard to imagine that suddenly everything just got rosy and now everything's fine again.
Well, he goes on to state, and he quotes somebody who says that they're out of all the units, they don't know of anyone who have taken on a gay adult leader. Well, how would you know? That wouldn't necessarily, it's not going to be on the form.
I think it was the Catholic Church that said that of the 7,500 units that call their churches home, that they haven't seen a gay leader come. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
Because of the the clear teaching of the Church about homosexuality as being incompatible with Scripture. What I'm saying is that this is just another one of the kinds of attempts that just get lobbed over the wall from places like the AP to just let us know that, everybody said it was going to be horrible, but everything's fine. Nothing to see here. Move along. Boy Scouts are Boy Scouts. And it's simply not true. We've watched this so many times. We watched it in our former church home. Everybody said, look, now that we've got gays in positions of leadership in the church, it's going to be a horrible mess, but look, 10 years later and everything's fine. Well, it's not fine. The numbers go down. The numbers go down in scouting. We actually just dismantled a troop right here in town that I was a part of because of a lack of boys.
Yeah.
They're just not here right now. We, those of us that were in scouts in the 60s, remember troops of 20, 30, and 40 guys. That was a normal troop. That's not where we are right now. Yeah. When was the last time you were invited to see a young man get his Eagle Scout pinned on? It just doesn't happen like it used to.
When my dad was a scout leader in Durham, we would take trips to the YMCA camp in Wake Forest, and we'd fill up 6 cabins.
Yeah.
It'd be easy to do that.
Yeah.
So.
And I love Boy Scouts. Please don't get me wrong. I'm very proud to be an Eagle Scout. I'm proud to be in scouting. I'm proud of my friends who are in scouting and their dads and moms who take them. It is, a youth-headed organization is one of the smartest things that ever came out of, out of England and then the United States. The idea of giving, in fact, the church that we've just planted in Swansboro is designed specifically the same way. It's a youth-headed church. The idea is that the youth are given the responsibility for running the church, and the adults are simply there to make sure that we don't starve, freeze, or cut each other with our pocket knives.
Right.
But it's a youth-headed organization. That is something I wish we had more of in this country, more youth-headed youth groups, more youth-headed farm groups, more youth-headed scouting units. It was, for me, it was a real leadership advance. It was huge.
Yeah, 4-H operates in some similar way. So there's some other things there. But the other side of this, the other comment about this story and this website, which I didn't know existed, I'm glad to find now, getreligion.org, is I want to go back to it and see how they treat other stories, because their monikers, the press, just doesn't get religion. You could also probably have a getscience.org as well, too, because the popular press rarely understands nuances of theology and also or nuances or ramifications of science. So those are two areas that often appear like they're in conflict, which we can argue that they're not. But the popular press doesn't know how to talk about them.
Yeah, it's funny. We're sitting here you and I are in the middle of the Democratic National Convention right now. And having just concluded the Republican convention, and this is precisely the conversation that's come up between the people who are analyzing the two, that Donald Trump is dark and dystopian, and really painting an America that needs to be made great again. And then we listen to President Obama and Bill Clinton and everybody else saying, "Oh, this nation's great, everything's fine, there's nothing to see here, we're stronger than we've ever been." And this is where the liberal media becomes the friend to the liberal politician when it throws out stories like this and says, "Oh, I know, everybody said it was going to be a really big deal, but it's not. Everything's fine. Everything's great. Nothing to see. Move along." And boy, after a while, I'm thankful there's a website like this that actually looks at how the media looks at religion, us.
I've taken the Associated Press to task on the same thing over the HB2 coverage, how it has been so entirely slanted in one direction there too, not looking at some other things. Even where I have great disagreements with that bill, it still is very slanted in its coverage. But also because the USA Today tapped on this years ago. They understood that we have a limited attention span.
Right.
And so if you can't say it in at that time, like 18-second sound bites, reduced to 8 seconds. Yeah. Now you see them reduced to 2, where you're getting an unattributed quote. You don't know who the person is, but they're saying something, and it becomes part of the story.
I remember being in seminary and my homiletics professor saying any sermon shorter than 20 minutes isn't worth writing. The contemporary wisdom is any sermon over 12 minutes isn't worth preaching because you've said too much. That's how much we've lost 8 minutes out of our 20-minute time just in the 36 years I've been in ministry. But this is you and I talked a little bit about this before, Ben, that a lot of folks don't understand how wire services and gathering services work.
Right.
That AP they're writing it, but writing is not their main thing.
They're mostly editors. And
they're gathering things from other resources.
Right. And so they mostly edit somebody else's work. And so in that editing, sometimes, well, my goodness, didn't we see that with scribes? In editing, sometimes you lose some things.
You can also pick and choose whose work you're going to take in.
Right.
If you're a gatherer, you're going to gather in the news that fits your agenda. And it's very clear the AP has a very left-leaning agenda. So we're going to take things out of the Observer rather than out of the, that's just the way it's going to work.
Right.
And so,
we need watchdogs, and watchdog organizations like this one. Apparently, not bad.
People need to understand who pick up their newspaper or who see a service reported on the TV. When you see those little letters AP, be careful.
See you next week.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.